If we talk about artificial intelligence, localization industry is kind of a pioneer here because we've been dealing with machine translation for quite a long time.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, translation, and global communication.
I'm Caterina from Undertow, and we are thrilled to bring you an exclusive conversation between our founder, Nicola Calabrese, and Alexander Ekhilevskiy, Localization Operations Manager at Vista. Sasha, as he is well known, has over 15 years of experience driving automation initiatives in the localization industry. He brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our discussion. Tune in as we explore the latest trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the workflow automation on localization.
Hello. Hi, Sasha. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
So today we're going to talk about the impact of workflow automation and localization. This sounds like it's a mouthful. It sounds like a big topic. But before jumping into that, can you briefly tell our audience a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, your role at Vista now, and a little bit of your background?
Sure. So my name is Alexander Ekhilevskiy, although I go by Sasha. So everyone knows me with this short name. And I'm currently a Senior Localization Program Manager at Vista, formerly known as Vista Print. And I used to work in one of the biggest language service providers for more than 11 years before. And I also I studied translation and interpreting. So I have quite a vast background in localization.
Yeah, quite a lot of experience in the industry. Yeah. And when you at Vista, I know you've been in charge of making sure that a lot of processes are being automated or streamlined as much as possible. Can you explain a little bit, let's say, how things sometimes might be done very manually, and what's the impact of what was you did at Vista especially, but more in general, if you can, what can be automated and what you did specifically at Vista?
Correct. Basically, I must say, when I arrived to Vista, it was already quite advanced in terms of automation. So it's not that I brought it all, but indeed, a lot of companies are still following very manual processes. While basically nowadays, I would say pretty much everything can be automated. The technology gets more and more advanced, so it's very easy to automate stuff. And especially people who don't know about localization, they have this feeling that you manually send the document somewhere. It's been translated by the linguist, and the document is being sent back. So to start, nowadays, any modern translation management system allows you to avoid sharing files with the linguists, sharing files with your stakeholders. Everything is stored in the system. So it's more like each party can access the system, get their documents, get their files. Actually, I think the biggest advantage of these translation management systems is that in the process of translation, you basically forget about the concept of the file itself. So you don't send it. And also, they were built initially also to help linguists avoid all the hassle of formatting, the typical thing when you type something in Word and then you add a comma and then suddenly the whole document is completely not formatted. You have to start over from scratch. This basically is not needed if you use automation because everything is kept in the system, and actually the documents are split into strings. So each string is more or less dealt with separately, not as a whole of a document. So that's probably the biggest thing. Then in terms of automations, obviously, if we talk about the submitter side, so if you're a stakeholder and you request translations, it also allows you to just drop your documents somewhere. Normally, depending on the system that you are using, there can be some portals. There can be sometimes you can have an automation, which is just you have an email where you send the email to certain address and it generates a job. And then also these documents are already parsed according to the rules that have been previously agreed with the localization department. Normally, typically in every document, you have strings that need translation, some other strings that probably don't need translation. You probably have internal comments. You may have some hidden text, even if we talk about Word again, it's like a very basic tool, let's say, but you may have a hidden text that doesn't need translation, or you can agree, I don't know, the text in square brackets doesn't need translation. It's just comments for the linguists. If we talk about Excel, it's the same. Maybe like you want to use one of the columns just to provide context, or one of the columns is some, I don't know, internal information that totally doesn't need to go to the translations. All that can be already prepared up front in a template normally. So you would define that certain submitter always submits this type of Word documents or Excels or whatever. And you say, okay, we only translate the column A and B, but we don't translate column C, or we don't translate hidden text in Word, and so on. So they basically can forget about preparation of the file for you for translation. Same on the localization side. You don't have to go every time, open the file and prepare it for translation, or mark certain fields for translation as not localizable. So all that definitely streamlines the process, makes life, I would say, both on stakeholder side and on the localization department side much easier, let alone for the linguists.
And something maybe that as well, it's interesting. Sometimes you can even connect with different systems, let's say with CMS or with GitHub repositories. And that obviously as well plays into this, it streamlines. And it's a big advantage, as you said, like helps you as well to standardize the processes, which down the line that translates into time saved, mistakes avoided, and a lot of headaches, I think. So.
Yeah, correct. Actually, that was when I joined Vista, that was one of our main goals, to basically create a flow where we were switching between CMSs. So we wanted to connect our translation management system to the new content management system. And we needed to make sure that content would flow in and out seamlessly. And also, in our case, for example, we don't have one single CMS. We have a main CMS, but then developers, for example, they are using a lot of GitLab, they're using some other repositories. So basically, the cool thing of the automation is that you can make sure that everything flows into one system. And nowadays, translation management systems, most of them, provide connectors to the most common management systems and repositories. So you can pretty much automate it all, make sure that everything flows into the same system. You have your linguists set up there, and also that ensures that you can leverage your translation memory. So basically you have your database of all the translations that have been done for your company, and you leverage them between different types of content. It's not only you use separate translation memory applied to every single document that you need to translate, but you leverage it across all the platforms. And it also turns out not only into streamlining processes, but it also leads to a lot of cost savings, obviously.
And connecting to this, I know, can you give some specific example, if you can, about tasks that you automated in Vista, or where you're seeing specifically that this automation changed quite a lot the way you used to work and the way you now work?
Yeah, basically, we did have some of the localization still running via Jira tickets, for example, and we tried to move away from them as much as possible. I will not say it's 100% proof already, because there will be still always some exceptions. It's nearly impossible to do it 100%. But basically, we tried, for example, for the GitLab repositories, we set up a number of folder watchers. So basically, we are our translation management system is watching certain folders. As soon as some strings are committed to this folder, they're being imported into our system, being translated and being exported back. We also set up several continuous localization projects. So continuous localization is probably further moving away from this concept of the file, because if you import something, for instance, when we are talking about this folder watchers in GitLab, they are normally JSON files or XML files or sometimes XLIF files. But basically, there's still this concept of file, right? It's being imported, we translate it, it's being exported, and then there's next version, and probably some strings will be updated, and then we will import the newer version of the file and translate that. In continuous localization, basically the file, you just monitor normally like one file in your remote repository, and every time a string is committed to this file, or this file is updated with some new information, basically it's being kept in a constant sync with the continuous localization project. So all these updates are made like, well, you can select the frequency of it. Basically, it can go, like from once every 24 hours to once every 5 minutes, depends on your needs. But basically, it's in constant sync. You never have to wait for when the project is completed, and then you have the next version, and then you update the next version. Especially this is normally done for like software strings, because like the software development, it's a very fast process, and they have these runs that are very, very continuous, pun intended. Or also like for gaming industry, we're not doing that, so just for similarity, for gaming industry, it also makes sense because there are also like constant updates of strings, and they are kind of all separate prompts, so it makes sense to translate them in this way.
For example, you mentioned the continuous localization workflow for software in your case. How did it impact? Like, how did you notice the difference from before you had the continuous localization and after, and why did it make a difference?
Well, actually, before that, we would still be uploading we would receive these files like in Jira, we would upload them. And indeed, sometimes we would import the files, translate them, and then while we were translating them, our developers would make a lot of changes. It's not only about adding strings. Sometimes they will also remove a lot of strings, because while they're developing something, they realize that they don't need something. They can get rid of a lot of fuss. Basically, it also helps us to not to translate stuff that is not needed anymore, right? Because if something is being removed, it's being removed immediately from the file as well, and you kind of constantly work on the latest version.
And do you currently have like regular sprints of localization as well that are synchronized with software development, or that's really still on a case by case? Like they might not need, let's say every week you get new strings, or is it just according to needs?
No, we don't have this like regular sprints set up. Basically, we have everything, like as much as we could, we connected all the repositories that were possible, and all the content management systems that we are using, and all different use cases within the company. So each of them is following like different, not each of them is following different, but like many different workflows created for every single need. But the idea is that we work on like the on-demand basis, meaning that whenever a stakeholder needs to request something, they request it. Our connectors are normally running, depending on the workflow, either on 12-hour basis or 24-hour basis, meaning that like we're watching the folders and they are importing the strings or files every 12 or 24 hours. We found it like more reasonable, because we used to, for instance, we also adjusted it when we were moving from one platform to another. We actually, the connector for the main content management system was set to every hour, because the amount of content that we were receiving was so big that we actually needed this to be a much more frequent import, let's say. Now, like when we're done with replatforming, we decided that it made more sense to kind of group it. It's also easier for the linguists, so they don't get the drops of 20 words here and 100 words there. So it's more efficient for them. And normally, in our case, it's not really... So like there's rarely an emergency that you need to translate right now or immediately, and then cannot wait for 2 more hours until it gets imported. If that's the case, we normally would have our stakeholders reach out to us as a localization team, and they would flag something as urgent. Then we can actually trigger manually the import. So that it's still much more automated than a manual creation of the project. You just like press a button and it gets imported. This is more or less what we follow. But we don't go with sprints. It's mostly indeed like on demand.
Okay, let's say communication side of things. I don't know if before you used to have a lot of exchange before launching like a new release or a new project, and how did it change now if you may be just doing I don't know, regular meetings rather and looking more at the general strategy rather than how to affect the communication with other departments and stakeholders?
I would say on the marketing side, there's still a lot of communication because indeed we have to be kept in loop depending on the campaign that is running, some strategy and decisions behind it, creative, more like about the creative decisions that are being taken for each campaign. So for that, I would say there are still regular calls and stand-ups, and we're also getting tagged in, the tickets that the creative teams have during their discussions. What definitely we felt with automation is that the communication with more transactional translations that went pretty much away. So there is a lot of strings that are being translated, as I mentioned, for developers who work on cart updates or some transactional emails that when you order something on the site that you receive some like an email with the details of your order, and for these emails probably need to be updated because the legislation has changed or whatever. All this communication is pretty much done, let's say, because we don't have to, they don't have to raise a ticket, we don't have to reply to this ticket, and so on. It's just if they have to update something, they update it and they know it's being pushed directly to us. We translate it, it's being sent back. There's not really much to discuss. And in any case, the communication, if needed, again, I also don't want it to sound like suddenly we are all, robots and not doing anything, not talking to each other. If needed, we can still reach out to the stakeholder we know who submitted the file or the string, and we can question something. We can ask for more context. And that is how it's working. It's the same pretty much with our main content management system, where we receive the files. Normally, we expect already, we tried to push all the stakeholders to submit context or reference files for the linguists together with the translation requests. So if the reference files are there and the file arrives and we can kick off, that's totally fine. If we see that something is missing, some information or something is not clear, then again, we can just go back and always check with them.
Yeah, so it's fair to say it's more like quality communication rather than just the repeated, here's a file.
Yes, correct. Also, another thing that is, I think it's important to mention with the automation and the file exchange is all the version control issues, because I remember back in when I started working in the language service provider, on the language service provider side, and all this technology was not still there to support you to that extent. And we had this, typical thing with the final version, the very final version. This is the very final version. And then you have to you have, 5 folders with dates and timestamps and whatever when this file arrived to make sure that actually you are translating the very, very, very final version of the file, and then you're sending it back. And it's very easy to say, actually in all this exchange, we missed the very, very, very final version of the file, and in the end it's not what was translated. While with automation, basically also ensure that there is the version control that is much more foolproof, let's say.
Yeah, because maybe the final file was in a different email thread and it just forgot you to CC in that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And that's something that doesn't happen.
I know what you mean. And when you led the automation and implementation project at Vista, is there any specific challenge that you found, either on communicating with stakeholder, technical challenge, anything that you think might be worth it in case somebody, let's say, want this kind of this kind of initiative, something that they should look out for?
Well, first of all, I would say is to always check the use case, right? Because the translation management systems, there are many of them nowadays, and they all offer, as mentioned, some off-the-shelf connectors. Said that not always these off-the-shelf connectors will be suitable for your use case, right? So, because also these connectors are built by the developers on the translation management system side, and they probably they have something in mind which is not necessarily the same way that your developers are doing their work on your side. So I would say this is the first thing to do, to test it and to make sure that it's actually suitable for your use case. For instance, like a very easy example, the way of localizing like articles in WordPress, there's possibility to build, the site where all the articles are kind of like under one tree and all the languages are kind of under one tree. Or some companies are having like separate instances. So they have, like WordPress for Germany and WordPress for France and WordPress for whatever. And then these are referenced from their main site. In that sense, depending on the connector that you're using, it will work or not, because we had this case. So like initially our translation management system was only providing the localization for this WordPress instance where all the languages were under one tree while we had it separated. So initially we could not connect it because we had it on separate WordPress sites and then connected to our main page, and they didn't provide this option. So eventually, like you go there and ask, do you have connector for WordPress? Oh, yes, we have connector for WordPress. Amazing. Let's use it. And then you face the fact that it's not working. So that would be my first advice, to test it and check it. And also to talk a lot with the developers about their need. There will be like, it's not something that is set in stone, in the sense that probably you set something up and then you see that it's not working and you have to adjust it for whatever reasons. And also, I would say it's good to always have backup options, in the sense that it's great to have an automation and it's great to have everything pulled together. But at the same time, if you put, all eggs in one basket, you can be pretty much sold out if one day, imagine like your translation management system provider has like a massive issue and crashes and whatever. And then you have to have some other options to continue working. So like work on contingency plan as well.
And just out of curiosity, how did you solve the issue with WordPress, the different instances? Did you finally integrate them all in one, or did you
no, basically like we talked to our translation management system provider, and then in the end they developed another plugin that allowed another type of localization. So it was kind of solved in foreseeable future, basically, but it was solved.
Yeah, I was curious because just to understand, maybe it's more disruptive to change the whole WordPress structure rather than do a bespoke.
It depends like on your needs and on the provider. Basically, like for instance, sometimes they're very clear and you ask them about some solution that you need and they tell, oh, well, it's not on our roadmap. We don't see you are the only one requesting that. It's a very like odd use case. We will not do it. So then you can also look into other options. If it's not the case, if you see that they are actually working on another solution, then you probably have to wait for a bit. Also, like we've been working closely with our internal developers to build up some of the solutions that probably were not available off the shelf. And also, like there are anyway some custom built tools in the company, and I think every company has it, that will not have any off-the-shelf connectors because just like only your company uses it. Thankfully, lately, like the API connections got in play. That solves most of the cases for the custom built software. So the API connections basically are the prompts that your software can send to the translation management system to like export the strings to be translated and then request them back. Or like you can automate it also using some webhooks. So basically when your project or your file is being completed, it triggers, the connection and it says to your system, hey, this is completed, import it back. This is also an option to build your custom connections. And it's fairly, like I would say, easy and low resource involvement is needed normally. We do have quite a lot of API connections directly with normally, like that's also something probably to ask you when you're choosing the translation management system. Ask them already for the documentation on API connections. Normally by default they will all provide this. And then you can work with your developers directly and make sure that you implement those and build more connections than I initially able.
And we're connected to this thing, what you mentioned about APIs and going back a little bit to communication. Do you use somehow the API connection to maybe automate some of the status updates and communication like this? Let's say, I don't know, maybe once task that has been uploaded, once it's ready, you get a message on Slack or something like that. Or
no, normally we don't have messaging with the API connections. We only use the webhook. So basically, like once the project is changed to project status is changed to completed, it triggers the export back to the source repository. We don't use communications. We do have like Slack messages and so on. For example, we did automate, for instance, we have a query sheet where our linguists log in queries, and we did implement messaging to Slack every time someone logs a query, so we can immediately see it and don't miss any of the messages. For that, it makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a great use case, I think. Yeah, as well. Did you manage to do you reply from Slack back to the Google Sheet, or you still have to log into the Google Sheet to reply to?
No. You log into the Google Sheet. It's a very basic thing where it just sends you a notification, says, "Oh, there's a question about this file. Go and reply."
Yeah, it's still useful, and avoid a little bit of clutter with the emails as well. And I have another question about this. Is more about like once you implemented a project, what kind of metrics, like an automation project, what kind of metrics or KPI, if there's any that you use or you recommend to basically monitor and see, was this a success? Did we save X amount of time? Or
it's a difficult thing. Like I think the KPIs in localization are always a very big pain point because no one knows how to measure them. Starting with the fact that you don't like localization sits under different departments in every single company, so it's kind of hard to report. In terms of automations, like what we had as a KPI, basically we had a percentage of the jobs that were going manually through Jira tickets versus, so we were monitoring the percentage of those, and our goal was to reduce this percentage to like a minimum, to a possible minimum that we achieved. It's very hard to actually track the amount of time, for example, that you save, which is huge, but it's hard to track the amount of time that you save thanks to the automations, because basically we would need to sit with the timer and say, oh, now you, instead of spending 20 minutes of preparing these files, you spend 5 minutes, which is kind of possible on the short scale, but we have not been actively tracking this. We're more like we were looking more on, savings thanks to the translation memory and all that, which is obviously much easier to track because there's some objective data that, if we are leveraging 70% of our content from the translation memory, then you know that you are saving this amount of money and also time. The automations themselves, as mentioned, is kind of a bit of a fiddly thing to measure. Yeah, I would not know how to keep track of that.
Yeah, I think a stopwatch would probably be put there with a stopwatch.
Oh. Exactly, yeah.
And you said some of the stuff, especially the continuous stuff, there might be tasks that are automated to a point that you might not even realize it's being done until you see later on. So it's really difficult as well to quantify, you have to keep track of everything that's being done automatically. Oh, no, yeah, it makes sense. And one last question that I have for you is actually if there's anything that we missed that you think it would be important to mention or to discuss about this topic of automating tasks and workflows.
Well, in terms of workflow, automations, I think the hot topic nowadays is the artificial intelligence, which I don't think it's directly related to the automations. It certainly there will be further developments in terms of machine translation as applied to localization, let's say. In any case, I would say that we talk about the artificial intelligence. Localization industry is kind of a pioneer here because we've been dealing with machine translation for quite a long time, and kind of it was completely unnoticed by the rest of the world until ChatGPT came to this world and suddenly revolutionized it all. But we've been living with this reality for quite a long time, and I think probably we are in localization industry. We kind of also have this feeling, like that it's something that you have to embrace, but at the same time, it's not that it will completely replace you and we will be all suddenly jobless with some robots doing all the work. On our end, like we are running some machine translation tests precisely to see the metrics and to see what are the efficiencies. So basically, we're now comparing, trained machine translation engines versus untrained machine translation engines to also see whether the training part and like the investment is worth it, or actually because fairly we need to say that the neural machine translation is pretty much on a very good level nowadays. So with post editing, we're comparing basically whether it's worth to go with one scenario or another scenario,
especially on for certain kind of content. It is, let's say, more suitable than other. Just to note, when you say training the machine translation, you mean like is like a customized engine, right? Yeah,
correct. Yeah. So basically, you can customize your engine with all the data, like from your translation memories and the glossaries and the terminology. You add all this, and then the machine translation engine kind of knows your preferences. But at the same time, it's a lot of time investment and money investment. So you need to kind of see whether it's worth it or not compared to the kind of maybe you only use an untrained machine translation, but with your glossary and already then the post editing is already doing the trick. Obviously it's all depends on the context, and as mentioned, we're working with for example some marketing materials. We're not even considering using machine translation for marketing campaign because we actually want them to be very localized and adapted for each market, and we are pretty much sure that that's something that we cannot expect from the machine translation, at least for now. For more generic stuff, obviously that's going to be future. And then for text generation, I would say yes, also generative AI for, again, depending on the type of content.
And the language, I will say as well. It changes even more than the machine translation. I think generative content, it's quite different if you do it in English or if you do it in another language. Yeah.
Obviously, like for English, the amount of content that has been poured there for English is huge. So it also works much better for English. That's for sure. And also, for instance, even for translation, like some people use ChatGPT for translation, and some within the team we're doing for fun, more or less, trials, because we're all native speakers of different languages. And we were doing some tests, and it was surprising to see, for instance, some Polish colleagues were saying that Polish was actually surprisingly good. There was ChatGPT, but then I tried it with Russian, and it was very underwhelming, I must say. And for instance, for me, DeepL, which is one of the providers of the neural machine translation, delivers much better results for Russian than ChatGPT. So you always need to check this. Definitely, I would not recommend blindly relying on this is AI, the new toy. Let's just go dive into it.
Oh no, yeah. Always human review. Always human review before publish. Yeah, for example, in Italian, when it generates content, is a little bit. It sounds a lot like translated from American English, so a lot of exclamation marks that we don't really use in Italian that much. So it is, it sounds, it's okay, but you definitely need to rewrite a lot. Still not there.
Yeah. Luckily for us.
I mean, the thing is there's so much to do. It's not, as you said, it's not like now we're all instantly going to lose all our job. There's so much stuff that, takes part of a little bit of what we've been doing. So it just gives more time to dedicate to other things that maybe sometimes we just postpone and actually crucial, maybe more strategic. And you say, I'll do it later. And
I think it's the whole thing about automation, actually. The automation, going back in our conversation, right? It allows you to focus on actually a more interesting and more meaningful stuff rather than file handling. Because 20 years ago, it was all about writing endless emails and sending files back and forth. And now we don't do this part anymore, but there's still a lot of other stuff to do. It's just more meaningful, and it makes sense that you dedicate your time to that and not to sending files.
Yeah, I doubt there's gonna be somebody that wants to go back to like email exchange with attachments.
No.
So
Definitely not.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. And I think, we can wrap up this topic for today. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.